Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Mrs. Jones, an elderly spinster, lived in a small Midwestern community. She had the distinction of being the oldest resident of the town. One day she died, and the editor of the local newspaper wanted to print a little caption commemorating Mrs. Jones' death. However, the more he thought about it, the more he became aware that while Mrs. Jones had never done anything terribly wrong, she had never spent the night in jail, for example, or just been caught doing anything wrong. She had also never actually done anything noteworthy either. While musing this over, the editor went down to have his morning coffee and met the owner of the tombstone establishment in the little community. The tombstone proprietor stated that he had been having the same problem. He wanted to put something on Miss Jones' tombstones besides just her birthday and death date, but he couldn't think of anything significant she had ever done. The editor decided to go back to his office and assign to the first reporter he came across the task of writing up a small article suitable for both the paper and the tombstone. Upon returning to the office, the only fellow around was the sports editor, so he gave him the assignment. They tell me that if you pass through that little community now, you will find this little poem etched on a forgotten marker. Here lies the bones of Nancy Jones. For her, life held no terrors. She lived an old maid, she died an old maid. No hits, no runs, no errors. That's the problem I have with today's virtue, temperance. Temperance could also be defined as self-control. And there's something about total self-control that makes me uneasy. And I think that story of Miss Jones gets at the heart of it. Too often when we control ourselves too much, we never amount to anything. We put our plow on the asphalt and get the mule to pulling, but when we look back, there's nothing to show that we have passed. To paraphrase the country song, you've got to stand for something or you won't amount to anything. In truth, I think when Aristotle included temperance on his list of virtues, he was advising that people should exercise self-control in matters of drinking, lewdness, sex, and other moral concerns. And certainly that's a need in our world of today. But when I think of self-control, I can't help but think of that story in the Bible where Jesus didn't seem to have any. Can't you just see the uproar and commotion he caused when he was turning over those tables piled high with money and freeing the animals about to be sold for sacrifice there in the temple? But you see, I think there's a pretty important distinction here. Jesus lost control because he was so committed to God. He had given himself totally to God, and he couldn't tolerate the abuses he saw. I was very impressed when I read about former football star Bubba Smith, and I think he exhibits the virtue of temperance. Bubba Smith has sworn off booze, not drinking it, but selling it. Bubba apparently never did drink, but he sold a ton of beer by making cute TV ads you'll probably remember. But then Bubba suddenly kicked the habit. Here's how it happened in Bubba's own words. I went back to Michigan State for the homecoming parade one year. I was the grand marshal, and I was riding in the back seat of this car. And the people were yelling, but they weren't yelling, "Go State, go." One side of the street was yelling, "Tastes great." And the other side was yelling, "Less filling." Then we go to the stadium. The older folks are yelling, "Kill, Bubba, kill." But the students are yelling, "Tastes great, less filling." Everyone in the stands is drunk. It was like I was contributing to alcohol, and I don't drink. It made me realize I was doing something I didn't want to do. I was with my brother, Toady, who's my agent, and I told him, "Toady, I'll never do another light beer commercial." As the years wear on, You stop compromising your principles. And I think that's the message for us today. Bubba had a principle, and he let the principle exercise control over who he was and what he stood for. And that's what temperance as a virtue means for us. For us as Christians, we must give control to a principle, to a standard. And for us as Christians, that principle, that standard, that rule of life is Christ. And everything we do ought to be tempered by his example, by his teaching, by his love. Temperance, self-control. It doesn't mean moderation. It means giving yourself over to Christ. That's our call today. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.